أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وسندنا مولانا محمد عبده ورسوله ألف صلاة وألف سلام عليك يا رسول الله ألف صلاة وألف سلام عليك يا حبيب الله ألف صلاة وألف سلام عليك يا من وحي الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In Quran chapter 21 verse 83 says, in the name of Allah, the most most merciful, most compassionate, when he called upon his sustainer saying, verily harm has afflicted me and you are the most merciful of the merciful. When he called upon his sustainer saying, verily harm has afflicted me and you are the most merciful of the merciful. This is the supplication or the prayer that was done by Job, Ayyub alayhi salam, the prophet of patience as we know him, the champion of patience, Ustad calls him. So we're reading from the second flash, with the flashes collection, inshallah, and then we're going to be doing point 1. The gist of the story first of Ayyub alayhi salam, if we're not very familiar with, which most Muslims do know, but we'll go through the story. The gist of the famous story of Job, as he is known in English, and Ayyub alayhi salam in English, in Turkish or Arabic. While afflicted with numerous wounds and sores for a long time, he recalled the great recompense, the great reward to be had for his sickness, and he endured it with utmost patience. But later, when the disease coming from the worms generated by his wounds penetrated to his heart and his tongue, which is the seat of remembrance and the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he feared that his duty of worship would suffer, and so he said in his supplication, his prayer, his dua, not for the sake of his own comfort, but for the sake of worship of Allah. He said, "O Allah, harm has afflicted me. My remembrance of you with my tongue and my worship of you with my heart will suffer." Allah Almighty then accepted this pure, sincere, disinterested and devout supplication in the most miraculous fashion, and he granted Job, Ayyub alayhi salam, perfect good health and made him manifest all kinds of his compassion. So just really quickly, Ayyub alayhi salam, before he is inflicted, actually before we go any further, last week we did the lesson about not justifying your faults and your sins and the wrong things that you do. Now, why do we justify? And as we said, like when the devil gets involved and your nafs gets involved and you start to justify the wrongs that you do, and you try and defend yourself like a lawyer, right? But why does that happen in the first place is what the lesson we're going to do now, inshallah. So it connects to that. So the story here is about Ayyub alayhi salam, and he's going through a particular sickness, and these boils start to develop on his body, and worms are eating him from the outside all the way into his body. And then it goes so far that the worms start to penetrate into his heart and are now biting in his heart and biting his tongue. When he got to that stage, he turned around and he said, "Oh Allah, only now harm has afflicted me. The harm has touched me now. Why? Because I can't remember you with my tongue or my heart. So my worship is going to be affected. Please help me now." But before that, he was suffering the same distresses, same disease, same problems, but he never complained, he never asked for assistance, he was very patient with his sickness. But now that harm has afflicted him, not for the sake of his own comfort, for the sake of being able to still worship Allah, he says, "Oh Allah, the worms have come to my mouth, my tongue, and with this I make zikr of you, and I remember you with my heart, and that's been affected too. So he turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in a way was asking for assistance, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him pure health. So corresponding to this story, corresponding to the outer wounds of Ayyub alayhi salam with his sickness, with the worms penetrating all through his body, we have inner sicknesses of the spirit and the heart. Ayyub alayhi salam was physically diseased with worms penetrating to all parts of his body, all the way down to his organs, where his heart and his tongue were starting to become affected. But look what Ustad Badiou Zaman is saying. He's saying corresponding to the outer wounds, the physical wounds of Yunus alayhi salam, Ayyub alayhi salam, we have sicknesses of our spirit and our heart. So he's got worms eating his physical body. We have worms eating our spiritual bodies. If our inner being was to be turned outwards, if our inner sickness of our heart was turned outwards to the physical outside body of ours, that we would appear more wounded and more diseased than Ayyub alayhi salam. More diseased and more wounded than Job alayhi salam. Why? For each sin that we commit and each doubt that enters our mind inflicts wounds on our heart and our spirits. Each sin, each wrong, each haram that we commit inflicts a wound and to our heart and our spirits. So the wounds of Ayyub alayhi salam were of such a nature as to threaten his brief worldly life. So if Ayyub alayhi salam, at worst case scenario, the worms would have penetrated to his heart and he would have died. Simple, right? What would he have lost? Maybe 20, 30, 50 years of the lifespan that he had left over, and that's it, finished. He will meet his Lord in paradise, inshallah, for doing the job. He's done his job as a prophet of God. So his brief worldly life only is being affected, but our inner wounds threatens infinitely everlasting life. If we have a spiritual disease and we're committing sin after sin, haram after haram, not looking at the consequences, always justifying ourselves in that, right? What we did from last week, then what's going to happen? Over a long period of time, it becomes like a habit. Then you start losing your conscience that's talking to you. Like your conscience tells you when you're doing something wrong. Imagine you repeated the same wrong that you do many times, right? Imagine the first time you ever done that wrong and how bad you felt, and then imagine it at almost the end of that time where you started to become really comfortable with your haram, with your sins, with the wrongs that we do. So what happens is, it's like a voice inside your head, it's like a voice inside your heart, your vijdan, your conscience is speaking to you. But that voice, the loud voice that normally tells you, you shouldn't have done that, what are you doing, becomes dimmer and dimmer, becomes less and less. As we keep doing the same sin over and over again. So then these sins that are going to be wounding our spiritual beings threatens an everlasting paradise, everlasting life that we're supposed to be going to. Just as the worms that arouse from his wounds penetrated to his heart and his tongue of Ayyub alayhi salam, Prophet Job, so too the wounds that sin inflicts upon us and the temptations and doubts that arise from those wounds will may God protect us, it will penetrate to our inner heart, which is the seat of our belief, and thus it will wound belief. If your belief is wounded, is there everlasting happiness? If someone lost their belief, the key to paradise is belief. The level at which you're going to be in paradise depends on the righteousness and how much of that belief you practiced and lived, right? Penetrating to the spiritual joy of the tongue, the interpreter of belief, they cause it to shun in revulsion the remembrance of Allah and reduces it to silence. Allah. The spiritual tongue, the interpreter of belief, through sins, it causes them to be quiet and reduces the remembrance of Allah to silence. Sin penetrating to the heart, now this is the most important part of the days we're talking about, right? Sin penetrating to the heart will blacken and darken it until it extinguishes all of the light of belief. Sin that penetrates to our hearts will extinguish the light of Iman. Doesn't make sense. You do a sin, how can your faith be wounded? What's your faith got to do with anything, right? It's sort of like, it's a bit funny what it sounds like. But, so penetrating to the heart, it will blacken and darken the heart until it extinguishes the light of belief. How would it do that? How would committing sin destroy your faith, your Iman? Isn't Iman just a state of mind? I believe or I don't believe, right? So how can a sin that I do affect me believing or not believing in Allah? Watch the complexity of how it all works, it all ties in. Unless that sin is swiftly obliterated by seeking Allah's forgiveness, it will grow from a worm into a snake and it will start biting on your heart. Remember we said that if you don't ask for forgiveness, so what the devil does, it encourages you to justify your faults. It denies the wrong that it does. It doesn't listen to your conscience, and it tries to defend itself like a lawyer all the time. So when it does that, it doesn't ask for forgiveness.
Feel numb.
Yep, and you become numb to it. You don't feel it anymore. And that's exactly what the devil wants. He wants you to be feeling numb about it and not asking for pardon, not asking for forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, now this is where it comes to, right? Why and how a sin can penetrate to the heart and cause the belief that you have to be destroyed. A man who commits secretly a shameful sin will fear the disgrace that results if other people were aware of it. Imagine you're doing a haram. Would you want your mom or your dad to see you doing that wrong thing? You want your children or the people that you love, that respect you and that? You would not want anyone, but especially those that are very close to you. So the secretly committed harams that we do, the sins that we do, right, which are shameful, you will feel the disgrace if anyone else was aware of that sin. So what will happen? So who's watching? Let's say you're in absolute isolation, no one's there, you're secretly by yourself and you're committing a sin. Who's seeing you? No one. No, there is someone who's seeing you, isn't there? The angels are watching over you. The angels are writing on your right and left shoulders the good and the bad deeds that you're doing. So now what happens? Within each sin, it said there's a path that leads to unbelief. Thus now then, knowing that somebody else witnessing your sin is shameful, no one wants to feel shame, right? Thus the existence of angels and spiritual beings will be hard for him to endure. It will be hard for him to swallow that somebody is actually watching him, even though he is secretly committing a sin and he is all by himself, lonely, alone doing that sin. And he will then long to deny, he will desire to deny the angel's existence. Even on the strength of the slightest indication, he will accept that as evidence. He says, oh, what if this is how it first starts off. What if there was no angels watching me? And I'll be committing this haram, this sin, at least I can receive the pleasure of the sin, not being shameful about how I'm doing this, because the shameful part hurts my conscience, my vijdan, and I'm not able to receive the pure pleasure out of it. Always something's nagging at me, telling me what you're doing is wrong. If I can get rid of that sound in my head, if I can get rid of these angels watching me doing these wrong things, I want to feel better about it. So then a desire to deny the angels arises in him now, because he starts to say, I wish there were no angels watching me. Then the next step would be, maybe there is no angels watching me. The wish that you have will come true. If you wish that they're not there, then you deny it in your own world. Then you start to deny the things that are around you, that are causing your conscience to make you feel that you're doing something wrong. Similarly, okay, we go to the next step. Similarly, one who commits major sin, deserving of the torment of hell. Let's say we're doing something and we know that we can go to Jahannam for it. We can go to hell for it, if Allah doesn't forgive, that is, right? That person will desire the non-existence of hell. How good would it be for someone who's committing a sin that normally deserves hellfire, if you said to him, oh look, there's no such thing as hell.
Jesus died for your sins, therefore.
That's part of the same story too, isn't it? The same scenario. Salvation comes, you just believe Jesus, you love him, and that's it, it's all done for you basically. But the person who is committing major sins, that is deserving of the punishment of hell, will desire the non-existence of hell altogether. What would you say? If someone came to you, brother, and said, you know you can go to Jahannam for doing what you're doing, you can go to Jahannam for what you did, you can go to Jahannam for what you said, I can go to Jahannam for what I'm doing, for example, right? You start to get fearful. You get scared. So what does the heart want to do? I wish there was no punishment of hell first. And then if the devil opens up a way of allowing you to deny it somehow, the person goes, maybe there isn't hell. I'll give you an example, right? Oh, God is so merciful in that. Why would he burn anybody? Allah's not really going to burn anyone, the guy who's doing all the wrong, because he knows that he could go to hellfire, right? And no one likes the idea they're going to go to hellfire. So they go, I wish there was no hell. Okay, if you wish there was no hell, and then a suggestion comes, maybe there isn't any hell. It's a nice feeling. There is no hell then. What happens next? Watch. He wholeheartedly would love that hell didn't exist. From his heart, it's like praying, I wish there was no hell, right? And whenever he hears of the threat of hellfire, he will dare to deny on the strength of a slight indication or some doubt. Look, man, God is supposed to be merciful. If God is merciful, as if he's going to throw you to the fire. That's probably just metaphorical, or they just say that for bad people. You're not a bad person.
It's misunderstood.
It's misunderstood, whatever it might be. You start to find the different interpretations of the law we spoke about, remember? People start to misinterpret the information because they're not living it. Because they're not living the pure, righteous way of what is supposed to be lived, they find justifications, other ways and means to deny certain parts of what Allah is telling us in order that they feel good about themselves. He will dare to deny it on the strength of the slightest indication or doubt, unless he takes up the protection and the shield of repentance, making tawbah, repenting to God and seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Similarly now, one who does not perform his obligatory prayers and he does not fulfill his duty of worship will be affected by distress, just as he would be in the case of a neglect of a minor duty towards some petty ruler. Even you go to a job site and you're not doing your job properly, right? And you're scared that your boss is going to find out that you're being lazy, for example. But imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordained, commanded that you do the 5 daily prayers. Now the person who does not do their prayers and fulfill their worship towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will feel distress in their hearts because they know that what they have to do and what they're not doing. Okay, so this naturally causes distress. Just as he would be in the case of a neglect in any minor petty job, let's say. Thus his laziness in fulfilling his obligation, despite the repeated commands of the Sovereign of pre-eternity, will distress him greatly. The guy's going to say to himself, man, Allah tells me over and over again, don't do this, and the consequences is that you might go to Jahannam. Don't do this, so repeated all the time the consequences of your actions, it will distress him greatly. And on account of that distress, now on account of that voice that's telling you you're doing the wrong thing, you should be praying, you should be doing the right thing, nagging at you constantly, that person will desire and say to himself, would that there be no such duty. I wish there was no salat, man. The guy who doesn't perform salat will say to themselves, I wish there was no such thing as these prayers. Why? Because he's not doing it, that's all. He's distressed that he's not doing them, so he desires to deny the existence of those prayers even. So he says, I wish there was no duty of worship. In turn, there will arise from this desire a desire to deny Allah altogether. What's worship, man? What would Allah even desire? Why would He want our worship? He doesn't need the worship, so why is He asking us to pray 5 times a day? In reality, He doesn't really want us to pray. Right? Look at the conclusions He's coming to. Why? Because the small duty that He's supposed to be performing, He's not performing it. So, a fact of wanting to deny the worship first comes into his heart as a doubt. Then he starts to deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What kind of God would put me in this situation where He's asking me to wake up in the morning, asking me 5 times a day, every single day, to do this? He starts to question the Creator and why He puts that duty upon him, because it's distressing to him that he thinks in his own world that he is unable to do that. But if anyone in this world was unable to do it, Allah would not have commanded it as being compulsory on every human being. I was saying the story to the brother yesterday, we were talking about it. In the beginnings of Islam, where they were defending their own faith and they're being attacked, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his Sahaba, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his Sahaba, his companions, they stopped for Salat in the middle of the war, all of them together. They stopped for Salat, they started praying in the middle of a battle. They're charging at them. The enemies are charging at them. They said, well, time for prayer, we have to pray. Allah commanded it. So they started praying. Now, the people that used to be enemies before they're writing, some of them become Sahabas afterwards too. Alhamdulillah. One of the good examples is like Khalid bin Walid and that, right? They say, we don't get it. We were charging at them. Next minute, they started prostrating on the ground and that, and we just stood there, watched them. We could have slaughtered all of them. That was our opportunity to get rid of them, to get rid of the Muslims. He said something happened to us, and we were just standing there, dumbfounded, just watching them until they finished. Then they picked up their swords and they started fighting us again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected them. And then the verse comes, when you are in war, separate the forces, like half or one group fights while the other group prays, then the other group prays, and then the other group fights. But before then, the innocence of just the virtue of wanting to pray and please their Creator is so significant that the enemies are coming, they're going to die. My job is to pray. Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, the guy says, and starts praying. In the middle of the battle, people are praying on horseback while they're fighting still. They're charging, like say the enemy is further up. The guy is praying on horseback because he can't get off the horse at that particular second. People in hospitals are praying with their eyes because they can't move their limbs. If you have to pray with your eyes. There is no excuse not to pray. Zero, zilch, none. But what does the devil say? Let's say somebody doesn't pray. What excuse do you hear from them? Everyone would have heard some excuse when someone doesn't pray. What's the biggest excuse you hear these days?
I was at work, I was tired.
Work, exactly, work. Too busy. Too busy for Allah. That's one of the biggest ones I hear too. Well, just work. Oh, I'm so busy, I'm working, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. God, inshallah, Allah will forgive me, I'm doing other things. What worship is doing the worship, demonstrating your weakness and impotence towards Allah, allocating your time, sacrificing that moment, and then standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doing the worship when He asks you to do it. Can you pray? Let's say afternoon prayer finishes at 4:13. Can you pray at 4:15, the afternoon prayer, 2 minutes after it's finished? No. Compulsory part is that you pray it. Of course you can do qaza, you make up for later, but the prayer, so the timing is compulsory. You pray, Allah, this is what Allah's message to us. You pray when I tell you to. Okay, can we just lay down on the floor and pray however we want? Can we do somersaults, roll around, or just sit down however we feel like it? Or is there actual routine of how you have to do it? There's a routine. So what does it say again? You will do it when I tell you to. You will do it how I want you to. That's called submission. That's where we become Muslims. We submit to the will of Allah, and we stand in front of Allah. We say, Oh Allah, I am here because you called me. I stand here because it's your command. I come here at a particular time because this is when you want me, and this is how you want me to worship. That's the beauty of worship itself. So the person will say, I wish there was no such duty of worship. In turn, there will arise a desire to want to deny Allah altogether, and they start to bear enmity towards Allah. The people who don't pray, they start to dislike Allah because Allah gave them a command that they're not able to fulfill, and they're feeling guilty in their conscience, and they say, what kind of Allah makes us feel guilty for not praying? He wants me to stand in front of Him every single time, up and down, bow up and down. Why did He make me before in the first place? He didn't ask me before He made me. Blah, 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 and then the excuses start coming in. You see, justification, again, for your own self. So what does he do? He starts to have enmity, like a hatredness, like an enemy to Allah. He becomes like an enemy to Allah. if some doubt concerning even the existence of the divine being comes to his heart, he will be inclined to embrace it like its conclusive proof. So if someone said to him, in reality we come from the monkeys, and the evolution theory is correct, I'm a scientist, trust me, the guy's looking for an excuse to run away from the duty of worship. He wants to run away from the guilt of maybe going into hellfire. He wants to run away from obligations and the things that's burden him on his shoulders. So any small indication that might come to him, he wants to accept it so he can run away from that duty. A wide gate to destruction will be opened in front of him, and the wretch does not know. He does not know, the poor guy, he does not know that although he's being delivered, he's being saved by denying from a small duty. What happens if you deny God? Maybe you're saved from the small duty of the 5 daily prayers. Okay? So Ustad is saying, even though he is saved from, because of his denial, he is saved from the simple duty of worship, he will make himself, by the same denial, he will make himself the target of millions of troubles that are far more awesome than praying itself. Running away from the bite of a mosquito, he welcomes the bite of a snake. He runs away from the bite of a mosquito, which is worship. He falls into the mouth of the shaitan, or the traps of the shaitan, into the mouth of the snake. There are so many more other examples which may be understood with reference to these three, so that the sense of but nigh their hearts are stained. But nigh their hearts are stained will become apparent. Some people's hearts become stained. They are so distant from worship, they are so distant from Allah. They want to deny with wholeheartedly so they don't feel a burden on their shoulders that they have to do. One of the main reasons that people deny Allah is because they know the burden of responsibility once they believe. So they will find any excuse not to believe. I've had people where I've spoken to them about Islam and that, and they go, yeah, that's so convincing, yep, you're right, and you say, well, if everything is right, now there's a responsibility. But no, not for me. It's right, but it's not for me. It's funny, there was one story, I was talking about this to the milkman, he became friends. I said, come on, I want to read you something. I started reading a little bits and pieces of these words from Ustad Badi'i Zaman, and he turned around and goes, that's really interesting. I'm gonna have to go and think about this over a cold beer. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتحة.